the young, and the restless spoilers. Adam Newman paced back and forth in his living room, his mind a tangled web of frustration, regret, and longing. The recent weeks had been a whirlwind of emotional chaos ever since Sally Spectra had walked out of his life. He couldn't shake the feeling that it was all his fault, yet at the same time, he found himself desperately searching for someone else to blame. That someone was Chelsea Lawson. To Adam, the situation seemed painfully clear. If Chelsea hadn't re-entered his life, if she hadn't seduced him in a moment of weakness, then maybe, just maybe, Sally wouldn't have left. The thought gnawed at him constantly, twisting his memories until all he could see was the pain of betrayal, real or imagined. But as much as Adam tried to convince himself that Chelsea was the root of all his problems, a part of him knew that the situation was far more complicated. The truth was, both he and Chelsea had made mistakes, and their relationship had always been fraught with tension and unresolved emotions. They had both been willing participants in the night that had shattered whatever fragile peace Adam had found with Sally. Yet, Adam couldn't help but direct his anger toward Chelsea, unable to face the part he had played in his own downfall. The fight, a home torn apart. The tension between Adam and Chelsea had been building for days, and it finally erupted in a shouting match that echoed through the entire house. Adam's voice was harsh, filled with accusations that cut deep, while Chelsea's responses were sharp and defensive. The argument escalated quickly, their words becoming more venomous as the volume of their voices rose. "This is all your fault, Chelsea," Adam shouted, his face flushed with anger. "If you hadn't pushed your way back into my life, Sally would still be here." Chelsea's eyes flashed with indignation as she snapped back, "Are you serious, Adam? We were both there. We both made the decision to sleep together. Don't you dare put this all on me." Their voices clashed in a chaotic symphony of blame and bitterness, neither willing to back down. The tension in the room was palpable, a storm of emotions that had been brewing for far too long. In the midst of it all, they seemed to forget that they weren't alone. Connor, their young son, had been listening from the shadows, his small body curled up in a corner of the room where he thought he was hidden. As the argument grew louder and more intense, Connor's fear took hold. The safety and security he had once felt in his home were shattered by the harsh words flying between his parents. Connor's breakdown. The unseen cost. The argument between Adam and Chelsea might have been just another chapter in their tumultuous relationship, but for Connor, it was something far more destructive. The boy had always struggled with anxiety, and his obsessive-compulsive disorder, OCD, had been a constant battle, but the shouting and anger from his parents triggered something deep and uncontrollable within him. As he listened to the fight, Connor's mind raced, unable to process the emotions that were bombarding him. The fear and anxiety built up until he couldn't take it anymore. He needed an outlet, something to focus on, to control in a world that suddenly felt so terrifyingly out of his grasp. In his panic, Connor turned to the only thing he knew how to control, himself. His fingers found the skin on his arms, and before he realized what he was doing, he was scratching, tearing at his flesh in a desperate attempt to find some semblance of order amid the chaos. The pain was sharp, but it was a distraction, a way to drown out the screaming and the fear. Blood began to seep from the wounds, staining his clothes and the floor around him. It wasn't until Adam and Chelsea noticed the silence that they realized something was horribly wrong. Their argument came to an abrupt halt as they turned to find Connor huddled in the corner, his arms covered in blood. "Connor!" Chelsea screamed, rushing to her son's side. Adam was right behind her, his face drained of all color as he took in the sight of his son's self-inflicted injuries. The panic that had fueled their argument was replaced by a new kind of terror as they frantically tried to stop the bleeding. Adam fumbled for his phone, dialing 911 with shaking hands, his mind racing with the implications of what had just happened. The aftermath, a father's realization. The ride to the hospital was a blur of flashing lights and sirens. Connor was barely conscious, his small body trembling as the paramedics worked to stabilize him. Adam and Chelsea sat in stunned silence, the weight of what had just happened settling heavily on their shoulders. When they arrived at the hospital, Connor was rushed into emergency care. Adam and Chelsea were left in the waiting room, the stark white walls closing in around them as they grappled with the reality of their situation. Victor Newman had always been a looming presence in Adam's life, his judgments and expectations shaping much of who Adam had become. But in this moment, Victor's voice echoed in Adam's mind, a harsh reminder of everything he had tried to ignore. Victor had warned them, hadn't he? He had said that they weren't fit to be parents, that their toxic relationship would only harm Connor in the long run. And now, as Adam sat in the cold, sterile waiting room, he couldn't help but feel the sting of those words. The guilt was overwhelming. Adam had always prided himself on being strong, on being in control. But now, faced with the consequences of his actions, he felt anything but. The anger that had consumed him earlier had dissipated, leaving behind only a deep, gnawing sorrow. When the doctors finally came out to speak with them, the news was grim. Connor's condition was stable, but his mental health was in serious jeopardy. The doctors recommended that Connor be sent to Paris, where he could receive specialized treatment for his OCD, treatment that he couldn't get in Genoa City. Adam and Chelsea exchanged a look, the weight of the decision pressing down on them. Sending Connor away felt like admitting defeat, like acknowledging that they had failed as parents. But deep down, they both knew that it was the right thing to do. Connor needed help, and the best way to help him was to let him go. The departure, a heartbreaking goodbye. The day of Connor's departure was filled with a somber quiet. Adam and Chelsea stood together at the airport, watching as their son prepared to board the plane that would take him far away from the turmoil of their lives. Connor was quiet, his usually bright eyes dull with exhaustion and sadness. "Connor," Adam said softly, kneeling down to look his son in the eye. "I'm so sorry, buddy. For everything." Connor nodded, but his expression remained distant. The trauma of the past few days had taken its toll, and there were no easy words that could make it better. Adam's heart ached as he realized just how much his son had suffered because of his own failings. Chelsea wrapped her arms around Connor, holding him tightly as tears streamed down her face. "We love you so much, Connor. And we're going to make sure you get better, okay? You're going to get through this." Connor didn't respond, but he hugged his mother back, his small hands clutching at her as if he didn't want to let go. As they watched him walk away, Adam felt a deep, crushing sense of loss. This was his fault, his and Chelsea's. They had let their own issues, their own anger, drive a wedge between them and their son, and now Connor was paying the price. Victor's words rang in his ears once more, "You're not fit to be parents." As the plane took off, carrying Connor far away from them, Adam couldn't help but wonder if Victor had been right all along. Maybe he and Chelsea weren't meant to be parents. Maybe, in the end, they had done more harm than good. A new chapter, the road to redemption. With Connor gone, Adam and Chelsea were left to pick up the pieces of their shattered lives. The house felt empty without the sound of their son's laughter, without his presence to remind them of what they were fighting for. And in that emptiness, they were forced to confront the reality of their situation. The argument that had sparked Connor's breakdown was just the tip of the iceberg. There were deeper issues at play, issues that neither of them had been willing to address. But now, with Connor's departure hanging over them like a dark cloud, they had no choice but to face the truth. Adam knew that he couldn't keep running from his mistakes. He couldn't keep blaming Chelsea for everything that had gone wrong. The responsibility was his to bear, and if he wanted any hope of salvaging his relationship with his son, he had to start by making things right. As the days turned into weeks, Adam and Chelsea worked together to create a plan for Connor's recovery. They spoke with his doctors in Paris, arranged for regular updates, and made a commitment to be better, for themselves, and for their son. It wouldn't be easy. The road ahead was long and uncertain, and there were no guarantees that they would ever fully mend the damage that had been done. But Adam was determined to try. For Connor's sake, and for his own. Because at the end of the day, Adam knew that his love for his son was the one thing that could keep him going, the one thing that could help him find his way back from the